Hello, this is Wonder Recapped. Today we bring you the movie, A Monster Calls. Hope you like it. Connor would have a terrible nightmare every night in which he watched his mother fall into the abyss. Every time this moment, he wakes up from his dream and stares out the window into the darkness of the night. And it all started with his mother's chemotherapy. Due to his parents' divorce, Connor lives with his cancer-stricken mother. Although he has been caring for his sick mother for a long time. However, when he saw the weak appearance of her mother, Connor can't help falling into sorrow and pain. In addition, in order to release the bitterness in his heart, Connor always doodles in class to express the imagination in his mind. Since Connor would often stare at a tall guy, the tall guy would always ask someone to beat up Connor after school. One night, Connor's mother found an old-fashioned projector, and the movie King Kong from the Empire State Building fall scene, so that recalls the nightmare of Connor very scared. That night, Connor was painting what he imagined, but he heard a low voice calling him in the darkness. And with the earth tremor, he saw that the yew trees in the cemetery not far away had begun to change. In Connor's terrified eyes, the lush yew tree turned into a monster. The monster then walked towards Connor. In order to protect his mother, Connor did not run away. Then the monster grabbed the skinny Connor and told him that he would come at 12:07 every night to tell him 3 stories. But after listening to the 3 stories, Connor also has to tell a story for the monster. And this story must be the secret that Connor hides in his heart. Connor initially refused. The monster with hellfire eyes woke Connor up immediately. He hurriedly ran to his mother's bedroom. Although the mother did not want her son to see her so weak, but she couldn't resist Connor's pleas and let Connor fall asleep with her. The next day, Connor got up early and walked outside. He looked at the yew tree not far away, and still had a spasm of fear. At this time, Connor's grandmother returned to take care of her seriously ill daughter. She suggested that her daughter could hand over custody. But this was strongly opposed by Connor's mother, and Connor was reluctant to accept the arrangement. During the heated argument, Connor's mother collapsed to the ground. This made Connor, who witnessed all this, even more terrified and helpless. Late at night, he gave up his bedroom to his grandmother, while he tossed and turned on the living room sofa all night. At first, he thought the monster would not come again. But as the clock hands going round, the earth began to tremble, and he immediately saw the monster waiting outside the house. Connor wanted the monster to drive away his grandmother, but the monster firmly refused. Connor had no choice but to listen to the monster tell the first tale. In the story, the wise and great old king lost 3 sons one after another. The queen was unable to bear the loss of all their 3 sons, leaving the king alone in despair, with the company of his orphan grandson. The little prince was brought up by the old king. But just when the little prince was nearly a man, the old king married a young and beautiful new queen. Before long, the king died suddenly, and many people speculated that the new queen poisoned the king for the throne. The prince was too young to take the king's place, so, by law, the queen would rule for another year. The queen, however, was rather enjoying being queen. In order to put people in her pocket, the queen wanted to marry the prince. The prince, however, didn't like the idea. He took his beloved and they rode away into the night. They stopped to rest under the branches of a yew tree. The next morning, the prince awoke. His lover died in a pool of blood. Taking this opportunity, the prince gained the support of the people. The yew tree turned into a monster and helped the prince push the queen down from the throne. After listening to the story, Connor thought this was a story of justice over evil. The monster told Connor that the queen did not kill the prince's lover. But the prince killed his lover with his own hands in order to gain the support of the people. The queen hadn't poisoned the king. He had merely grown old. The queen was not a murderer. So the monster took the queen and carried her far enough away to a village by the sea, where she began a new life. In this story, the monster tells Connor that man is a complex creature and that there is no absolute good or bad, just like Connor's grandmother. Inspired by the monster, Connor seemed to understand what his grandmother was doing. At school that day, he stared at the tall man, and Connor was beaten again. On the other hand, Connor's grandmother could only call his father to take care of Connor because his mother was hospitalized. The happy time with his father made Connor just want to leave this depressing town. But Connor's father was reluctant to take him away because he couldn't bear to hurt Connor's mother and grandmother, which made Connor very angry. After returning home, he began to destroy everything, and even pulled out the hands of the clock that had been passed down the family for more than 100 years. And with the arrival of 1207, the monster reappeared and began to tell Connor a second story. 150 years ago, technology developed rapidly. A traditional pharmacist was opposed by a local parson, even though both have the purpose of benefiting the people. Everyone followed the parson's words, and the pharmacist was rejected by everyone. The pharmacist hid in the deep mountains, but still did not forget to look for life-saving herbs. On the parsonage grounds there also lived a yew tree. The pharmacist wanted the yew tree very badly and the pastor rejected him harshly at first. But one day, the pastor's two beloved daughters were struck by a terrible sickness and nothing the parson did helped. There was no choice but to approach the apothecary. The pharmacist put forward his requests and let the parson give up everything he believed in. In order to save his daughter, the pastor decided to obey the pharmacist's requirement. However, the pharmacist was disappointed in the parson. In the end, the parson not only lost his daughter, but also suffered revenge from the monster. Connor didn't understand the monster's approach at first, but after hearing the explanation, he got the point. Everyone will encounter hardships and face choices. Belief is very sacred, so sticking to it is sticking to one's bottom line. After the monster finished the story, he began to encourage Connor to punish the parson. Connor thought he was destroying the pastor's house, but when he woke up, he found that he had messed up the living room arranged by his grandmother. At this time, Connor's grandmother happened to return from the hospital. She looked at the scene inside the house and the damaged century-old clock speechlessly. After a silent outrage, Connor tearfully watched his grandmother return to her room. The next day, Connor saw his father. Instead of harshly accusing Connor of losing control, his father simply helped Connor clean up the room and explained to him the reason for the divorce from Connor's mother. The two then arrive at the hospital, where Connor sees his grandmother, who is speechless, and his mother, who pretends to be strong. To comfort Connor, the mother said that a new drug made from a yew tree would cure her illness. Upon returning home, Connor summoned the monster, hoping that the monster could help him save his mother. Under his constant requests, the monster agreed casually. Connor breathed a sigh of relief and temporarily calmed down. Connor met his father next day, and since his father was about to return to the United States, he could only bear to say goodbye to his father. Late at night, Connor found that Grandma was watching home videos about his mother. In the video, Connor saw the goblin described by his mother, and that was exactly what the monster looked like. It was only then that Connor realized that the first time he had met the monster was through his mother's painting. Well, at this time he recreated the character image with his spiritual brush. The dark monster was like Connor's repressed heart, so he returned to school with this resentment. But the tall man who has been bullying Connor has seen through his thoughts. Connor is unsociable, thin and inexpressible. He wanted to get attention by provoking others. After realizing what Connor was thinking, the tall man decided to treat Connor as the invisible man. At this time, the monster appeared again and told Connor the third story. In this story, the invisible man broke out and then chose to fight back. At the instigation of the monster, Connor's long suppressed emotions finally exploded, and he kicked the tall man into the hospital. Connor returned to the classroom and found that his classmates finally began to pay attention to him. But these eyes were full of dodging and fear. Afterwards, Connor went to see his mother again. But his mother told him that the new medicine containing yew tree ingredients did not work. Realizing that this was his mother's last goodbye to him, Connor ran under the yew tree. He was punching and kicking at the big tree, and the monster almost lost control under his call. The monster forced Connor to tell the fourth story agreed upon. At this time, Connor suddenly became afraid. He just wanted to go back to the hospital to accompany his mother. But the monster showed the most frightening scene in Connor's dream. As the mountain shook, the earth cracked, and his mother began to fall towards the abyss. Connor immediately rushed forward in spite of himself. He squeezed his mother's hand tightly, but her mother still fell into the abyss in front of Connor's eyes. Under the constant pressure of the monster, he finally roared out his secret. In fact, Connor had realized that his mother was bound to die, and the pressure of life had already made him out of breath. Although his heart is desperate for this to end soon, he understands that when it is over, he will also completely lose his beloved mother. After listening to the story, The monster told Connor that humans are complicated beasts. Although I believe in a bright future, I know the pain of reality. That's why Connor suppressed his true thoughts and nearly caused him to have an accident. Seeing Connor finally release the pain in his heart, the monster was relieved. The monster comforted Connor gently, and coaxed him to sleep slowly. When Connor woke up again, it was already late at night. However, Connor's grandmother anxiously pulled Connor and ran to the hospital without saying a word. At the railway crossing, they happened to be stopped by a passing train, and Connor finally confessed his mistake to his grandmother. And thinking of the reality that is about to face, they fell into each other's arms, sobbing on each other's shoulders. After that, the two rushed to the hospital in time. At this time, instead of escaping the reality, Connor chose to face the death of his mother this time. Accompanied by the monster, Connor held on tight to his mother, and the dying mother also came to the end of her life in the company of her family. Eventually, with the death of her mother, Connor began to live with her grandmother. Only then did Connor realize that the room that served as his bedroom was actually the boudoir of his mother before she got married. At his mother's desk, Connor saw a picture book drawn specifically for him. The contents of the album are exactly the 3 stories that the monster told him. At the end of the album, he also saw a little girl sitting on the monster. At this point, it has just dawned on him that the monster was the patron saint created for him by his mother. And the love has been passed on to himself through his mother's brush, which finally allowed him to liberate it from the psychological tumor and regain the courage for life. Well, I'll leave the story there for now. If you like my video, please don't forget to like and comment. See you tomorrow.